Okay, welcome back. We are going to be going over some reading today. I've already recorded this video once. I wasted a recording on passage one, but apparently the audio wasn't working. So here we go again. Our goal today is to go over some reading strategies that will help with your SAT and general test taking. Today I've got lined up a PSAT that I have not yet done. This is the 2019 October 30th exam. If you have a copy of it or would like to pause the video and read through the passage before we begin, I encourage you to do so, and then we can compare notes after you've read it. I'm going to read the passage out loud and demonstrate my active reading strategy. And as you can see, maybe in the margin there where it says summarize as you go and anticipate questions. This here is a double passage. Let's go ahead and zoom in on that. This is a double passage where you've got passage one and passage two, and the strategy here is to break it into pieces. The smaller pieces that you have to digest, the better you're going to perform. It's easier to retain and understand smaller bite-sized chunks of things and not overwhelm our thoughts. So without too much more preamble, let's go ahead and dive right in. I'll read the passage out loud and summarize as I go, demonstrating the kind of thought that I put into a passage. This is one that I have not seen myself yet. We don't use this one at my lessons because it's a reproduction. It's not a like a pure test, I would say, but it's good enough for this purpose. So here we go. Always read the title. So we've got passage one adapted from that. Moral force to be reckoned with. So it's about morality, national literature, and international question. So it's about literature and morality. All right. Sorry for my cursor. If you can see that, it's like wigging out. I don't know what that's about. Pull it off the page there. Let's see. Yeah, my cursor doesn't know what it wants to do. Anyway, we are 2.5 minutes into the video. Let's go ahead and use that as our timer. A nation's literature is the mirror through which people see themselves. Children and adults need to see themselves in their country's fiction and poetry. So it's about social identity and connection to literature. So that's what that's about. Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? Until you see yourself in literature, written word, you don't exist. So they're quoting this person to reinforce this idea that national identity comes with literature. This is every national school curriculum includes a study of nations' literary works. So they cite the national identity again with literature in the schools. So the purpose of the first paragraph is to situate the idea of the passage in that context of national identity and literature education. Reading the literature of a country is like listening to its heartbeat. One hears the hopes, fears, angst of ordinary folks like you and me. At the universal level, literature is the bridge built by imagination to help us cross over to the interior landscape of those who are different from us, yet the same, as extraordinary and odd as ourselves. Okay, so there's a duality in this paragraph. We have personal connection to literature, and then we have a social connection to literature. Starting with individual and then expanding out. And then paragraph 3, the writer's focus provides readers with insights into the society to express unexpressed, to say the unsaid, to give voice to those with no voice. So this is telling us that literature connects us to ideas that we might not experience firsthand. It exposes us to experiences that we do not have the opportunity to experience. This has always been one of literature's many contributions in Literature King or Beggar, Prime Minister, Dialect Speaking Squatter. These are just examples. I'll take center stage as main character. No other school subject focuses on individual marginalized in the way that literature does. This in itself is a moral force in a world in which numbers count and wealth, power, and intellect dominate. So they're emphasizing the ethical situation of literature, the unique ethical focus of literature, as opposed to math and sciences, which are impartial to ethics. Singapore literature has something to offer us in the world. It is neither monoculture nor monolingual. So they're emphasizing the diversity of Singapore, and that connects to the ideas above, how we get to know other individuals without meeting them, and how everybody has something to contribute and everybody is equal. So I see this coming here. Compromising the poetry of fiction of four official languages, Singapore's literature rights across language and culture, the congregation of English and Asian voices is part of our national fabric and identity as people. So reiterating the idea of identity in literature here and how identity is diverse within this area. The Singapore novelist writing in English accepts the challenge of recreating and rendering the variety of Asian voices and languages into English. Our literary fiction, poetry, and plays offer the reader multiple perspectives and individual narratives that question, challenge, and broaden our views of ourselves beyond the national Singapore story and the officially sanctioned founding myth. In the long run, while geography and politics continue to shape our nation, our literature will reveal our collective soul. So this whole last paragraph is acknowledging that it's a challenge to the author who is writing in an Asian language, but coming from an Asian language and writing in English, and the idea that writing in this way broadens our experiences, bringing it into the English world. That's the end of passage 1. So let's jump over to the questions. What do I anticipate? I anticipate questions about nationalism and identity. I expect questions about the ethical role of literature in helping people to identify the value of others or the experience of others. I expect that will be a primary focus of the questions. All right. It starts with passage 2. Curious. Usually that is not going to be the case. But let's jump ahead. Passage 1. Best supports Lim's idea that country's literature can affect individuals' perceptions of who they are. That was heavily focused in the lines 11 through 18 there. So I kind of like B or C, but let's see which one's better. So lines 2 through 4, let's see if it just says it. Evidence should be direct, a direct statement, or an example. Either a direct statement or an example. And that's what it says over here in the margin there. I made some preliminary notes. So individuals' perceptions of who they are. 2 through 4, a nation. Literature is a mirror through which people see themselves. I kind of like that one. Country's literature can affect individuals. So A says it somewhat directly. 11 through 12, reading to heartbeat. Listening to its heartbeat, that doesn't say anything. So that's not it. 13, at the ourselves. At the universal level, literature is the bridge by managing to help us cross over to the interior landscape of those who are different from us, yet the same, as extraordinary and odd as ourselves. So that's about connecting to others. The question is asking how it affects people perceive who they are, not how they perceive others. So that's why I'm eliminating C. 22. In literature to character. In literature, king or beggar, prime minister, everybody is the main character, all take the center stage. So those are the examples of the types of people, but again, we need to have direct evidence showing how it affects how people perceive who they are, so I do believe the answer here must be A. Passage 1 again. The main effect of the phrase, to express the unexpressed, to say the unsaid, to give voice to those who with no voice. What is the effect? It's giving us the impact or the effect of literature, or the purpose of it, you might say. To highlight defining characters of high-quality national literature. Is it about high-quality national literature or just any national literature? Let's see. Unique potential that national literature has to champion the oppressed. I kind of like that one because expressing the unexpressed, to say the unsaid, and to give voice with those who have no voice. People who don't usually have a means of, advocating for themselves might find that in literature. Yeah. Insights into their society. Everybody is equal. Focus on the individual or the marginalized. That's the key there. Readers the importance of national and civic education of all citizens. That is the purpose of the passage, but these words are not illustrating this civic education. So even though the overall passage is about that, C is mixing that out. Make sure that your answer is focused on what the question is asked. Encourage writers who focus on national literature to include characters' diversity. So no, they're not talking to authors to do that. That's about passage 2. That's about passage 2. All right, we have to go back and read passage 2 now. Let's see, it's been about 8 minutes. As a nation, we have no literature. The literary critic Belinsky cries in despair in part of one of Tom Stoppard's play, The Coast of Utopia, lamenting the influence of European writers on Russian writers, and stressing the importance of creating a national story of their own. All right, so they're citing a quote from a play that echoes the ideas of passage 1. So they may agree that there is some national characterization that comes out of literature. Storytelling comes a sense of identity. National literature evolves in stages, not literally stages like plays, but like sequences. The need for literature of one's own changes according to the political situation of the nation in question. A new nation, a nation struggling to declare its independence, will be driven to create something that is theirs, a literature that tells their national story. But the flux of modern history makes this a more or less impossible task. So they acknowledge that this is a challenging thing and that a nation's situation changes the story. And I'm just using shorthand to help myself remember that. The universal idea speaks through humanity itself, another quote, and differently through each nation in each stage of its history. So again, reiterating the same idea. Belinsky says later in the same speech, the need for a national literature changes according to the moment the national nation is experienced, and Stoppard catches this exactly. On the one hand, the ardent yearning for one, and on the other, the contingency of the literature in the historical moment. So they're acknowledging that people yearn for a national literature, a story of their own that they can see themselves in and connect to their broader context or their society. And then there's a contingency to that it changes throughout the history of the world. So in this moment, the story may be relevant, but in the future, it may not be. I'm anticipating that they're going to ask a question about that. They may also ask about what the word contingency or ardent means if they have a word in context question. I don't know. At the recent festival, American in Paris, the question of writers' nationality and ethnic identity preoccupied most of the discussions. That name, I'm not even going to pronounce. The Nigerian-born author of Half of the Yellow Sun argued for Nigerian literature to be taught in Nigerian schools. It's a paradox, she said. People can be considered educated while knowing nothing about our history. They read English books, not in Nigerian books. What this means is we really don't have a sense of our own history. Such history, she said, could not be written by outsiders. The stories of Africa should be written by Africans. So they're emphasizing here at the end that the stories can't just be about a place. They have to be produced by the people from that place. If you're going to define a national identity, you better be part of that national identity, as opposed to an outsider looking in. Then it's just anthropology, I would say. So to summarize, I'm connecting ideas together and anticipating what's coming next, not just in the questions, but also in the text. Here they're emphasizing the need of a national story and that national story may change depending on the situation of the nation. And then at the very end, they're emphasizing that the stories better come from people within that society. That was all that I had to add. It didn't contradict the earlier passage. It mostly agreed. The quotation from character Belinsky in line 44 serves to do what? Line 44 is to emphasize the desire. He cries in despair. Again, the whole thing was that the person desires a national identity, a national literature. Writers who focus on national literature as overly dramatic, those characterization words, it's not that the writers are overly dramatic, it's that the person is dramatic. That is not it. Provide a counterpoint to the opinions of the writer there who is also quoted. No, it is not a counterpoint. It is a supplemental point. Counterpoint is like a contradiction or a contrast. Illustrate Elkin's claim about historical change within a specific example of a creative work. Yes, that might be it, because it is indeed from a creative work, and it is an illustration of the idea. Represent the frustrations of people who desire the development of literature unique to their culture. Ooh. Tough call now. Historical change within a specific example. So historical change. No, I don't believe that quote is illustrating the historical change, even though that claim is consistent with the broader, circled again, with the broader focus of the passage or even the paragraph. That quote itself, as a nation we have no literature, does not itself illustrate the change. So I'm going to revise my answer from C to D. We did 11 and 12. Stages. And I mentioned this. It's not literal stages like platforms where an actor would stand. It's like different time sequence. So I didn't actually think they would ask about that one, but I knew that it could be interpreted with many different meanings, and there was a decoy in there because they were talking about a play. So at least I think they were talking about a play. So absolutely, they're not talking about literal locations, they're talking about a time sequence. Normally I would suggest that you go back and read it, but because I actually anticipated it, I nipped it in the bud. Usually that will not happen. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're over time at this point, but hopefully you've seen that this strategy, I mean, it's effective, I hope. We'll check the answers at the end. But I'm slow because I'm explaining as I go. Which choice best describes Elkin's perspective is expressed in passage 2 on people's desire for their own national literature. So we're just looking for something that's consistent with the broader passage. And here they have evidence of the previous question. Be mindful of things like that. So question 14 is going to set the parameters or the boundaries. Let's go ahead and zoom in just a little. It's going to help by setting the guide, like the guardrails, the guidelines on what our evidence it has to contain. And again, evidence either has to be a direct statement of the idea or it has to be an example illustrating the claim. So let's see what we have here. Let's set the guidelines. So people's desire for their own national literature. She appreciates that they want to establish an impressive account of the nation's history, but she notes that this might lead them to discourage the inclusion of regrettable historical events. The regrettable historical events and the discouraging against that, I don't remember reading that. It's a very short passage, so I don't remember seeing that in there, but it may be. Let's let our evidence tell us. Don't decide just yet. She sympathizes with their concern that writing from other nations can taint the development of a new nation's literature, while observing that all literature eventually becomes irrelevant as a result of historical shifts. Ooh, that irrelevant word is a little extreme. She does say that literature, the story needs to change with the changing moments within a history of a country. But to say that the literature is irrelevant might be a little extreme. We'll see if it says it, though, if the evidence supports it. The desire for national literature changes according to the historical situation. Yeah, that's totally consistent with the passage, which makes capturing the spirit of a nation challenging. Yes, this is a little bit more even-handed. We have to think like a judge here, where we don't want to pick one side or the other because of bias. And indeed, this does strike a nice balance here, but let's let our evidence tell us. She challenges the isolated nature of national literature and instead encourages people to read. Feels like this is cut off. Again, this is a reproduction test. There may be a little bit more to that. There's no period. So I wonder if that last line got cut off. She does not challenge the isolated nature, though. Again, these description words challenges the isolated nature. She's not challenging the isolated nature of natural literature. She's encouraging national literature and saying that it is challenging to do. So I like the characterization of C. But again, pay attention to characterization words. Regrettable, irrelevant, challenging, isolated. These keywords can help us to identify the true distinction in the answer choices. Let's check our evidence to see which one it is. 44, as a nation to our own. Destination, lamenting that writers, stressing the importance of creating national stories. So does that partner with anything? It has nothing to do with being impressive. It has nothing to do with regrettable, irrelevance. None of those are supported by this evidence, so get rid of that. Line 550 with, and that strategy where I just say the first word in the line, that helps me to remember where it's going. And the last word as well, with to identity. With storytelling comes a sense of identity. It doesn't support anything. That is way too brief. Doesn't say anything about impressive or regrettable, irrelevant. Those characterization words need to be either said directly or clearly supported by an example. The need to moment in 61. The need for national literature changes according to the moment, and the nation is experiencing Stopford catches exactly on one hand ardent yearning for one, and the other hand a contingency of literature on the historical moment. So that does seem good. The changes according to the historical situation is in there. Spirit of a nation is challenging, is missing though. So I might chalk that up to partial evidence. We're not going to toss it out until we check D, because that might be the best option we have. 76, such declared. Such history could not be written by outsiders. The story should be written by Africans. So that does not say the shifting to the historical situation part. So the best option we have is C. And I do believe that it must be D, because we don't have the irrelevance, we don't have the impressive and regrettable characterization, we don't have the criticism of isolated nature of it. 4 more questions. We're getting into the 21-minute mark. Let's try to zip through it. Adichie and others of Festival America were especially concerned with who the narrator was. Adichie was the author at the very end who was concerned about the authors coming from the nation about which the stories, like where the stories were coming from. So, common to American writers? No. It was about where the narrator came from. Changes in recent history that impacted national literature? Maybe. The role of literature encouraging positive relationship among cultures? No. Writers' national and ethnic identities? Yes. It was about the identity of the writer at the very end of the passage. That was the primary focus. And that's the power of summarizing as you go. If you remember what was said, the characterization should be consistent. And that takes time. That is a skill that you have to exercise. So flex that muscle, flex that part of your brain and exercise it. Challenge yourself to remember more information. Because you can do it. You can learn to remember more information. Just try. Which choice best describes the main difference between the overall structure and approach of passage 1 compared to passage 2? Overall structure and approach. And again, this is the benefit of summarizing as you go. So this was about national literature and identity. Literature and identity, again, as an individual and as a society. The ethics of it. The multiculturalism of it. The diversity of it. And the challenge of getting that diversity through. Here it's mostly just about the yearning for a story and the identity of the writer. So let's see what we got. Nuanced theory for a nuanced theory? I don't believe they propose a theory, so that's out. Sweeping narrative of the history of seeing. It's not a narrative of the history, so get rid of that. These characterization words, again, are very important to be sensitive to, because if that characterization is not clearly evidenced by the passage, do not pick it. A zealous defense of the need for national literature. Maybe, strong maybe. An impartial description of general characterization, characteristics of natural literature. I don't know if it's a zealous and impartial. I don't love that. Celebration of natural literature in general, and Singaporean literature in particular, yes, absolutely. Exploration of the tensions within the concept of national literature. Yes, absolutely. I think it's a slam dunk on that one that it is D. The tensions being like who the narrator is, because of course you can write Singapore literature or Nigerian literature and make it about the people and about the culture and create that sense of national identity. But if it's a story written by an American about Nigeria, well, then it's not truly Nigerian literature, is it? According to the author of Passage 2. But anyway, Lim and Elkin would most likely agree that national literature exists in order to help build an identity, help build a society and how they define each other or themselves, to tell their own story. To chronicle the events? Nope. That's a history, not a narrative. Reflect the identities and experiences of a people and connect them to one another. Absolutely. Accurate portray the culture. Accurately portray? No. Fictions are not often accurate to readers from other nations. And again, it's not to the other nations, it's a self-identification. That was the key here. Prove to already established nations that a new nation is the what? No. Has nothing to do with narratives. Get rid of that. We're looking for the main idea. The broad principle of the passage has to be evidenced by our claims. Lim would most likely respond to Adeshi's argument that Nigerian literature should be taught in Nigerian schools by agreeing, yes. So, nation literature is essential to include in the classroom teaching. Yeah, they said this as much. They said as much right here. The writer's focus. No school subject focuses on the individual and marginalized in the way literature does. This in itself is a moral force in a world in which numbers count and wealth, power, and intellect dominate. So they're emphasizing the value of literature as a subject within the schools and how important it is to have national literature in there. I think that's a pretty strong slam dunk for A. Let's check the other the other three just to be thorough. Singaporean literature is more diverse than Nigerian? No, they never make the idea that Singaporean literature is the most diverse. That's silly. Those comparison words should be really critically thought about. Arguing national literature has little to do with learning about a nation's history. That may be true. She may argue that, but that was not the Nigerian author's claim that it was about the national history. It was about the voice of the national identifier, that the Nigerian people have a voice. Extending Adeshi's point to say that nation schools should exclusively teach literature. No, again, pay attention to those characterization words. Is it true, in their view, that it teach exclusively literature from that nation? I do not believe that's the claim. Even if it's true, there's no evidence that says that. So it's essential to the classroom. I think that's a pretty strong slam dunk. Let's go ahead and check the answers here. I have an answer key at the bottom of the test here. Sorry for giving you a flashing screen. Sorry, flashing lights. Let's go ahead and I'm going to snip. You can't see what I'm doing here, but I'm going to snip out that column of the answer key. If you were working along, you can feel free to pause and grade your own work there. If you had attempted the questions before I did them. So let's see, we're at number 10. We got DABBCC, DABBCC, number 16, DDBAA, DDBA. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just prove it. I'm going to try to see if I can get the answer key up on there. Yeah, there it is. All right. Transition. Whoop. There's the answer key right there. And there we can prove that that is indeed the correct answer. So, what can we learn from this stuff? Do make sure that your answers have a clear support within the passage. As you're reading, make sure that you are summarizing each paragraph as you go, anticipating what comes next in the passage itself, and also anticipating what the questions will be. Annotate and summarize each paragraph. Doing that will help you to build the bones of the passage, to help you refer back to certain segments of it. It will help you to more easily identify evidences if you know what the paragraphs are broadly about already. As you're going through the questions, as you saw me doing here, make sure that you are identifying the characterization of the question itself and the answer choices. The characterizing words within the answer choices are going to help us to identify answers that are too extreme. They're going to help us to eliminate answer choices that could be true but are unsupported by the passage. So just be sensitive to those adjectives, those characterization, those description words in each answer choice, and try to challenge yourself to do those things. If you practice this is a skill. You can get better at it over time. Don't expect to be perfect the first time you do this. So do practice again and again and again, even doing the same passage over and over and over again to fine-tune that intuition that you have to become sensitive to those characterization words. Thank you for watching. If you learned anything, please give me a thumbs up and a subscribe. It helps me to know that I am helping, and it motivates me to continue to produce videos like these. Good luck with your SATs. Even in your schoolwork, if you find yourself doing these things, it should help there as well. And I hope to catch you on the next one.